My installation, titled The Parlor, is the culmination of this past year's work in the studio. It is made up of a set of 5 figurative soft sculptures, each displayed with their own set of found objects. The work is largely based in research, and much of it is informed specifically by the field of anthropology. I would like to begin by providing some context for the work through a summarization of my research, and then move to discussing each piece in the installation individually. During my sophomore year of college, I enrolled in an art history course that focused entirely on the movement of Surrealism, and introduced me to my favorite Surrealist sculptor, Dorothea Tanning. My favorite work of hers, Chamber 202, Hotel du Pavot, is an installation of a living room with multiple figurative sculptures. In the work, Tanning contorts the strange bodies so that they require support from objects of furniture. I admired Tanning's ability to coax the material into human forms, and her use of furniture to support the body would lead to my future research on the topic. As my concept continued to develop, I began to question my material. I felt that it was important for my work to be soft sculpture, but I needed an answer as to why. And once I knew why, how could I more effectively manipulate my material? In searching for an answer, I came across a quote from renowned art critic Barbara Rose. In it, she is speaking on Claes Oldenburg's soft sculptures, which are a series of everyday objects sewn and left limp to emphasize the use of non-traditional material. Of the soft machines, she says the following: if the soft machines are unthreatening, friendly, even in that they are like us, we cannot consider them alien. And it is the alienation of man from his industrial environment that Oldenburg prescribed. She is saying that by making the object soft, it becomes more relatable to the human body, and as a result, there's a feeling of complex humanness. Now that I understood my material on a deeper level, the question of the necessity for found objects and furniture began to arise. Searching for an answer led me to the work of Jody Maxwell. Through Maxwell's work, I was able to discover that furniture supports us in our everyday. It remains constant despite the waves of life. So by allowing the bodies to be supported by objects of furniture, the human element within them could be further emphasized. In addition to the furniture being seen as evidence of life, it can also be seen as evidence of death. If the furniture is a support for the soft bodies, and the bodies are not literally living, then the furniture is a constant visual reminder of what is no longer. As I mentioned, found objects also became important in my work. Marcel Duchamp's theory of the ready-made has been supportive of my findings here. Duchamp used the term ready-made to describe pieces that he made from manufactured objects. A part of his philosophy is that the presentation and naming of an object give it a new meaning. The way in which my pieces are displayed allows them to influence one another. They are installed as a family, and like any family, they absorb and in some ways mirror each other. I have also named them in a way that suggests their connection to one another, and that through this connection, they contribute to something greater. The work of Raquel Pajawanski has also influenced the evolution of my work. Her piece, Soul Juice, is made of bladders wrapped in wool stockings. The bladders, which contain breast milk, ooze and drip the life-sustaining substance onto the floor around the piece. Pajawanski's work is an excellent example of the uncanny. The uncanny refers to the anxious feeling we get when experiencing familiar things in unfamiliar ways. Sigmund Freud's essay, The Uncanny, suggested that the uncanny is the situation where something can feel familiar and alien at the same time. He described it as that class of frightening which leads back to something known of old and long familiar. The philosophy of Sarah Lucas has also allowed my concept to further develop. Lucas's work has been called provocative and darkly humorous, and she often speaks on sexuality, mortality, and the human condition. The theory of the abject, employed by Lucas, refers to work that confronts societal views regarding the cleanliness of the body. In practice, the object calls attention to the grotesque and unnoticed, and it calls them out directly and by name. As I'm sure you've been wondering, what is the significance of the parlor, and why have I chosen to refer to this installation by that name? I would like to begin by exploring the history of the parlor and its importance in both American and European society. The word parlor originates from the French word parler or parler, which means to speak or to have conversation. During the Victorian era, the parlor was the front room of almost every home. The purpose was largely for entertaining guests, but it was also a setting for familial connection. The parlor was the reflection of who the family was, and therefore was given a lot of time and attention, both by visitors as well as the family itself. During times of war, parlors transitioned into spaces that essentially functioned as morgues. Bodies would be brought there for identification, and funerary services would often be held as well. With this context, the weight of the name becomes clear. It is meant to both emphasize the importance of the connection of the family, in this case the pieces, to one another, as well as to invite the guest, in this case the viewer, to take a moment and engage with them in a conversation. It is also used to emphasize the balance of life and death that can be seen in the work. Before describing the specifics of the work, I wanted to provide an overview of what it is. I use secondhand materials because I believe they absorb energy and hold within them parts of our own lived histories. In the time spent with the work, I have begun to recognize that it exists in a state of fluidity. Many are rather morbid in narrative, but can come across as comedic in some ways, almost laughable. I feel that this is an attempt by the work to make these topics more bearable and more suitable for discussion. It is an attempt to cope with the past, present, and future, and to understand and make peace with life and death. In working with the materials, I began to recognize certain energies within them, and as a result, they received a name. Though these names may be indicative of a specific person, the work is not made in the likeness of anyone in particular, but is a combination of memories, histories, and identities. Because of the history and memory contained by the material, the pieces are often indicative of other things. This could be a person, place, time, event, or even a smell. Because of this, we have memories that are conjured as a result of interactions with the work. The work also explores our relationships and the ways in which we are influenced by the people, places, and things around us. But the opposite is also true. The things in our environment shape who we are and our senses of autonomy and personhood, and we shape them in return. I believe these sculptures are the husks of the lives that have been lived around and through them. In exploring this, I came across a quote from Sabina Magliocco, a folklorist and professor of sociology. In it, she is speaking about abandonment tropes that occur in liminal photography and the boom in the photographic subgenre that occurred during the pandemic. One of the tropes we see is the trope of abandonment, the trope of something being desolate, something that was once filled with life and is now empty. It is, in a sense, a nod to our own mortality. At one point, we will not be here anymore. The body that houses us, that holds our soul, our consciousness, will simply be an abandoned, empty husk. Because these sculptures are husks, they are able to confront the ways in which things will carry on long after us, and thus are able to make us question our sense of life. All of this information combined would form the basis for what my practice would become, and would inform the way in which pieces would begin to take shape. The next step at this point would be to begin making. One of the first pieces that emerged over the course of this year is Baby. During the making of Baby, I became interested in the impact of religion on young people and the ways in which it can hinder the discovery of identity. As many know, purity is a hot topic of discussion in religious settings, and so the symbol of the purity dress became important in the piece. The darker edges of the dress are to allude to the child growing up and becoming more worldly, which will lead to them presumably being shamed by the culture surrounding them. Originally, Baby was also displayed with a quilted wall hanging, which resembled the halo that is often seen in religious iconography. I chose not to include the halo in the final installation because it required the baby be installed with proximity to a wall, which did not align with the ultimate goal. Out of all the pieces I made this year, Grandfather is undoubtedly the most direct and morbid. Through him, I hope to explore death and the anxiety that is felt at the realization of the passage of time. Determining the final figure of Grandfather brought many challenges, and several different versions have come forward before this one. The final figure is intended to imitate a corpse, slumped forward, nearly lifeless. He has been given a burial shroud, which is a symbol used cross-culturally out of respect for those who have passed on. As a result of the draping of the shroud, Grandfather appears almost like a ghost, seemingly present yet absent at the same time. I would like to take a moment to touch on a piece that did not make it into the final installation, but was nevertheless important to the process. I refer to this piece as Father. The hope for Father was that he would explore feelings of loneliness, emptiness, and disconnection. In the process of his creation, I took a fair amount of liberty and made a reduction to the chair he is displayed with. I have to be completely honest. The modification of the furniture felt like a violation, like I was vandalizing something that didn't belong to me. Because of this, I made the decision to not continue this exploration. The next piece that emerged over this past year is Mother. As a society, the ideas we have of Mother are constraining. She is not viewed as a being of autonomy or desire, but is rather quantified by the services she provides or her ability to reproduce. We often forget that Mother cannot be Mother without being multifaceted, without being, at her core, a sexual being. As a result of the lack of humanity Mother experiences, she is filled with a lot of grief. An anonymous writer from The Exponent, which is an online collective of perspectives of modern women, said it best. Now please excuse this braless, picketing woman. Let her be angry. Her anger isn't an affront to you. It is the current face of her grief. Underneath, she is fearful that society won't change, and that the people of society and church around her actually don't value her as much as her husband and son. In the installation, a bouquet of dried flowers sits before Mother, in between her legs. It is intended to symbolize both her grief as well as her value beyond her physical body. As the work continued to develop, I wanted to explore ways that the forms of the bodies could vary from one another. Through Ant, I have played more with the expressiveness of my figures and the planes that they occupy. During this time, I also became interested in Greek theater, specifically the shifts between comedy and tragedy. Works of the time that were considered tragedies often contained analytical material in the form of social commentary, and comedies contained a variety of comments on sex and the body. I found this quite helpful in my attempts to balance both of those things in my work, and Ant allowed me to explore this further, pushing both my skill with my material and helping me refine my ideas. Sister is the most recent piece that has come from this body of work. She is intended to explore a need for attention and the freedoms of childhood. In appearance, she is rather ornery and almost feels a bit mischievous. She seems to almost invite the viewer to play a game of hide and seek. I also wanted to explore integrating the objects of furniture more with the bodies of the figures in a different way than I had with Father. For this, I chose a table shaped like an octagon and paired it with a fabric patterned with hexagons. Though they do not mirror one another perfectly, they are similar in shape. This, in addition to the way she seems to hide behind the table, allows her to seem as if she's trying to beat you in your hide-and-seek game by camouflaging herself. After installing the work, it became evident that they needed something to unite them, something to make their connections to one another clear, and something to indicate the presence of a defined space. As I looked more into ways that people historically decorated their living spaces, I realized that a rug was exactly what they needed. I searched locally, and in making some connections with the owners of the Hastings Antique Mall, I was able to get my hands on a vintage Persian rug that was in pristine condition. The result was that of a finished parlor, complete with furniture, a rug, and a family. As I conclude this afternoon, there are a couple of thank yous that I would like to give. I spent this year working primarily from home, and as a result, I was able to work in a more comfortable environment. During this time, I had a few unique studio mates who have been by my side the whole way. This big guy's name is Olaf. He came to college with me at the beginning of my junior year after he had been abandoned and living on the street for several years. From the moment I saw him, he completely captured my heart, and he quickly became my sunshine boy. His company, during long hours working through the late nights, kept me going, and seeing him curled up napping brought an indescribable peace during the chaos that has been this year. This past November, I was also blessed by the addition of 2 new members to my little family. They were brought into Ace Hardware one evening while I was working, and at the time they were small enough that they could fit into the front pocket of my apron. The moment I saw them, I knew I couldn't leave them behind. I brought them home and named them Opal and Onyx, my precious stones. Ever since then, my studio has been full of the sound of their tiny feet chasing thread and fabric scraps, and my heart has never felt more full. Without a doubt, this year would have looked very different if I had not had the 3 O's to keep me company, and I am very grateful to have had them by my side.
Fire away.
What was your biggest takeaway from working in found object media?
I think it definitely took me a lot of research to really understand and comprehend why I felt like that was important. A lot of people will jump to, you didn't make it, so it's not art, or it's not yours. And actually researching Marcel Duchamp and sort of that theory of found objects and the ready-made helped me to understand that part of what art making is making artistic decisions. Decision making is a part of that process, and so really my research really helped me to justify that. I see 2.
I was curious about your found objects. You talked a little bit about the rug, and that was sort of a targeted search.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of how it went for all of them? Like you're like, I know I need a grandpa armchair on Facebook Marketplace, or do you kind of just go places and sort of see what speaks to you? I was curious what your process was like for that.
Yeah, it's definitely more the latter. I enjoy thrifting to decorate my own personal spaces as well as to inform my work. And so a lot of what I do is I will go into secondhand stores or thrift stores and choose objects based on the energies that I feel surrounding them or through them when I'm interacting with them. And actually that armchair, I did get that off of Facebook Marketplace. I saw it shortly after it had been posted, and it just sort of spoke to me. So yeah, it's definitely an energy thing. Yes.
I was curious on how you made your decisions with each role that you're going, like there was a sort of structure, or you just like, as you're going, you're like, you know what this family needs? It needs a sister, it needs an aunt. Like, I was just curious about that process.
Definitely. I sort of like to let the pieces speak for themselves and sort of name themselves, I guess. Once again, it is a lot of spending time with the material, with the fabric, with the furniture, to sort of understand it in a way, understand what it's saying to me, and then sort of let that inform what it looks like, the design that comes, and then its role sort of in this family structure. Yes.
What was one of your biggest hardships working with it, with your materials? Is it all fabric and stuff? Did you have any messed up on this stitch and I need to go find more fabric somewhere?
Yeah.
What was your biggest challenge with your material?
So I definitely I had to sort of find this balance between hand stitching things and machine stitching things, which was very, very different. I've done some of both, but I'm not the most talented seamstress by any means, but I did have to sort of troubleshoot as I went along, and I never really ran into a scenario where I ran out of a certain kind of fabric. It sort of all just worked out, I guess. But you do have to sort of measure and plan, and I always draw out on the fabric before I sew it, which helps me sort of to gauge how much fabric I'm going to have left behind, but I usually don't leave myself a very big margin for error.
Despite the violation you felt, what ultimately led to you scrapping the idea of father?
I think that I sort of reached like a writer's block essentially, and I was struggling with what the fabric was saying to me. I also feel that it's important to sort of revisit these pieces, to modify them, to change them, for them to also have an evolution, a lot like we do. And so something I've been thinking about that I haven't had time for yet is revisiting that concept, because I think that that feeling of loneliness and disconnection is really important. That resonates with a lot of people. It's very heavy. And so it's definitely something that I want to revisit. I just didn't feel like the way that the piece was going fit with this installation in particular.